They fired her in the operating wing before the patient's heart monitor even stopped screaming. The words sharp and public, meant to cut deeper than the scalpel in her hand. "Step back, Dr. Rhodes," Victor Hale barked, his voice echoing off glass and steel. "You're done here." The room froze. A man lay open on the table, chest rising unevenly, blood dark and slick under the lights. The monitor spat warnings in angry red spikes. No one moved. No one breathed. Emily Rhodes didn't look at Hale. She didn't look at the residents, staring like witnesses to a quiet execution. She kept her eyes on the patient, steady, focused, her gloved fingers hovering a breath above torn skin. Hale leaned in close, his jaw tight, breath hot with authority. "You don't touch anything unless I say so. I don't care what you think you see." His hand trembled as he reached for the tray. He noticed it. So did everyone else. Emily stepped back exactly one pace, not in fear, in control. Her face gave nothing away. 34 years old, 5'4", hair pulled tight. No jewelry, no wasted motion. She looked like someone who had learned long ago that noise gets people killed. A resident swallowed hard. A nurse shifted her weight, eyes flicking between Hale and Emily, waiting for the explosion. The air felt thin, charged, like the second before a storm breaks. Hale straightened, louder now, performing for the room. "This is St. Gabriel Medical Center. We save lives by protocol, not by hunches." His eyes slid over Emily, dismissive. "And we don't gamble with patients." Emily finally looked up. Her gaze was calm, cold, assessing. She saw Hale's pulse in his neck, the way his confidence leaked when no one was looking. She said nothing. Somewhere deep in the hospital, a trauma alarm began to howl, and no one in that room understood yet that they were watching the wrong person lose control. By noon, the verdict was already circulating through the corridors, passed in low voices over bad coffee and worse assumptions. Emily Rhodes was too quiet, too young, too soft for a place like St. Gabriel. The kind of doctor who looked good on a brochure but folded when blood hit the floor. People said it with a shrug, as if her fate had already been decided, and no one wanted to be rude enough to argue with gravity. In the staff lounge, 2 nurses stood shoulder to shoulder at the counter, pretending not to watch her. "She didn't even push back," one murmured, peeling the lid off a yogurt. Just stood there like she agreed with him. The other snorted. "That's how you know. Hale eats people like that for breakfast." Their eyes followed Emily as she crossed the room, coffee black, untouched. She moved carefully, not timidly, like someone counting exits without meaning to. During rounds, Hale made a show of her. He asked questions meant for interns, anatomy so basic it insulted the room. "Second intercostal space," he snapped, pacing. Emily answered without hesitation. Short, precise, no apology. Every correct answer tightened something in his jaw. Every calm response made him push harder, louder, until the residents stared at their shoes and the nurses found reasons to step away. What none of them noticed was the way Emily listened. Not to Hale's voice, but to the building. The rhythm of alarms down the hall. The squeak of gurney wheels. The subtle delay between pages overhead. She wasn't shrinking. She was mapping the terrain. In the break room, someone laughed too loudly about diversity hires and Alaska clinics. Emily stirred her coffee once. She remembered heat so intense it bent the air. Remembered hands slipping on blood while rotor blades screamed overhead. Hale's voice faded into something small, something distant. She took a sip, set the cup down, and walked back into the hallway. As another trauma call crackled through the speakers, her pulse steady, waiting. The call came in just after 1400 hours, the tone sharp enough to change the temperature of the room. Multi-vehicle collision. Military transport involved. Incoming in 3 minutes. The hallway snapped awake. Shoes squealed. Carts slammed into place. Monitors blinked from idle green to warning yellow. St. Gabriel shifted from polite tension to controlled violence. Victor Hale burst through the double doors like he owned the oxygen. "I want Bay 1 cleared now," he shouted, snapping on gloves that didn't quite hide the tremor in his hands. "Full trauma team. Labs ready. Blood on standby." He stopped short when he saw Emily at the airway cart, checking blades with quiet efficiency. His eyes narrowed. Roads. Triage support only. Walking wounded. "Stay out of my way." She nodded once. Understood. No argument. No heat. She stepped back exactly where he pointed, hands already moving, eyes already tracking. The ambulances hit like a wave. Sirens howled. Doors flew open. Rain and diesel poured in with the noise. A young corporal came first, uniform soaked through, skin grey, breath ragged. "Blunt chest trauma," a medic yelled. "Pressure's crashing." Hale grabbed the gurney and ran, barking orders that collided with each other in the air. Emily stayed where she was told. She checked pulses, pupils, sent the walking wounded away with calm voices and steady hands. But her eyes kept drifting to Bay 1, through the glass, to the monitor above the corporal's head. Numbers falling, oxygen dropping, chest rising wrong. She felt it before she named it. The old tightening in her chest. The moment when seconds stopped behaving. Inside the bay, Hale swore. "I can't get the airway," he shouted. "Too much swelling." "Where the hell is anesthesia?" a nurse answered, voice thin. 5 minutes out. Emily finished taping a bandage. She looked at the monitor again. The trachea wasn't swelling. It was moving, shifting under pressure. The corporal's neck veins stood out like cords. Emily stepped forward. Not fast, not slow. 3 long strides. She stopped at the threshold, heart steady, voice ready, as the monitor screamed louder and the room tipped toward the air. "I told you to stay back." Hale's voice cracked as he jammed the laryngoscope again, sweat breaking through his composure. The corporal's oxygen dropped into the 70s. The monitor shrieked like an accusation. "Prepare for a surgical airway," Hale snapped. "We cut now." Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't step aside either. Her eyes moved fast, clinical, taking in the distended neck veins, the uneven chest rise, the way the trachea pulled off center with every failing breath. "It's not the airway," she said, calm enough to feel dangerous. "It's a tension pneumothorax." Hale spun on her, fury and fear colliding. "Get out of my bay," he shouted. "Security. He'll arrest in seconds," Emily said, already reaching for the tray. "If you cut his throat, you'll kill him." The charge nurse hesitated. The room stalled. Hale lifted the scalpel, then froze. For the first time, authority failed him. The monitor dipped toward flatline. Emily moved. She slipped past Hale with a shoulder check that surprised everyone, grabbed a 14-gauge needle, and found the landmark by feel. No pause, no drama. She drove the needle in, hard, clean. The hiss cut through the chaos like a confession. Air rushed out. The monitor stuttered, then climbed. 70, 80, 94. The corporal gasped, chest finally rising the way it should. Color bled back into his face. Emily taped the catheter down with practiced speed. "Needle decompression successful," she said. "Steady. He's ready for a chest tube." Silence slammed into the room. Hale stared at the needle, then at her, his face flushing with something ugly. "You disobeyed a direct order," he hissed. "You're suspended. Get out." Emily looked at the patient, alive. That was enough. She stepped back, hands raised, and walked out as the ER stared after her, unsure whether they had just witnessed recklessness or something far more dangerous. Emily walked past the trauma bay without slowing, the sounds behind her swelling again as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Orders resumed. Gurneys rolled. Someone laughed too loudly from relief. She didn't look back. She knew better than to confuse survival with gratitude. She removed her gloves in the locker room, peeling them off finger by finger, folding them into the trash with care. Her hands shook once, then stopped. She clipped her badge free and slipped it into her pocket, the plastic warm from her skin. Fired. Suspended. The words sat somewhere distant, administrative, almost boring. She'd heard worse under louder skies. Halfway to the exit, the building changed its mind. The overhead speakers chimed, sharp and rare. Code black. Helipad. Code black. The hallway emptied in seconds. Doors locked automatically with heavy clicks. A nurse froze mid-step, eyes wide. Someone whispered, "That's classified." Emily stopped. Code black meant command level. It meant rank without names. It meant whatever was coming out ranked hospital policy, personal grudges, and Victor Hale's entire career. She felt it in her chest before the name reached her ears. Hale stormed out of the trauma bay, stripping bloody gloves, irritation already loaded. "What now?" he snapped. "Who's inbound?" The hospital director appeared pale and sweating, flanked by military police. "Direct transport from Andrews," he said. "General Jonathan Caldwell. Collapse during a briefing. Uncontrolled internal bleeding." Hale's posture changed instantly. Anger evaporated into ambition. "Why here?" he asked, already adjusting his scrubs. "They're asking for someone," the director said, voice tight. "A doctor. Call sign ghost." The word hit Emily like a physical blow. She closed her eyes for half a second. Sand. Heat. The weight of a body dragged through fire. She turned toward the exit, then toward the stairwell. She was off duty. She was done. It wasn't her problem. Then she imagined Caldwell's pulse fading. She cursed softly, changed direction, and took the stairs 2 at a time as the rotors began to thunder overhead. The stairwell swallowed her in concrete echoes, each step pounding up through her knees, her lungs burning with something older than effort. The smell wasn't antiseptic anymore. It was dust and fuel and hot metal. Memory pressed in from all sides as she climbed, relentless. Caldwell's voice in her ear years ago, steady even while bleeding. The sound of rounds snapping overhead. The quiet math of deciding who could wait and who could not. The roof exploded into motion as she emerged. Rotor wash tore at her scrubs, grit stinging her eyes. A Black Hawk settled hard, blade screaming, the city shrinking beneath it. Hale stood near the pad like a man rehearsing for a photograph, coat flapping, chin up, already narrating heroics that hadn't happened yet. Nurses struggled to steady the gurney as armed security fanned out, hands on weapons. The helicopter doors slid open. 2 agents jumped down, scanning. Then the stretcher came out. General Jonathan Caldwell looked smaller than she remembered. Grey skin, tubes, a ventilator hissing like a warning. Blood pressure alarms chirped, thin and urgent. "What's the story?" Hale shouted over the rotors, stepping in. "We need imaging. Now." A colonel stumbled alongside the gurney, face tight with fear. "He's bleeding out. We don't know where." He asked for Ghost. Emily stepped out of the stairwell shadow. Hale saw her and snapped. "Get her off this roof. She's suspended." The military police hesitated as Emily raised a hand. Not loud. Certain. The colonel looked at her, confusion flickering, then recognition crashing in. His mouth fell open. "Captain," he breathed. "No. Doctor." "It's you." Emily moved to the gurney, fingers on Caldwell's chest, feeling the weak rhythm. "It's not abdominal," she said flatly. "It's vascular. Old shrapnel. A fistula." "He has minutes." Hale scoffed, voice brittle. "That's impossible." Emily met his eyes, cold and unblinking. "I was there when it lodged. And I told him this day would come." The wind seemed to die as her words landed, the rotors slowing to a distant thunder as every eye locked onto her. Hale opened his mouth, then closed it, recalculating. The colonel stepped between them without hesitation. "She's in charge," he said, voice shaking but firm. "By direct authority of the Pentagon." The military police shifted their stance, no longer blocking her, but him. Emily didn't wait for acknowledgement. She was already moving. "He has 4 minutes," she said, walking with the gurney as it rolled toward the elevator. "CT will kill him. We go straight to the operating room. Thoracotomy tray. Massive transfusion. Warm the room." Each order snapped into place, clean and unavoidable. People moved because her certainty gave them permission to act. Hale followed, pale now, anger stripped down to something smaller. "You're guessing," he muttered, trying to sound tall. "This is malpractice." Emily didn't look at him. "Guessing gets people killed," she said. "Pattern recognition keeps them alive." The elevator doors closed on the roof, dropping them into a tight steel box, humming with tension. Caldwell's monitor fluttered. The anesthesiologist swallowed hard. Someone whispered a prayer they didn't remember learning. In the operating room, time compressed. Lights snapped on. Gowns flew. Blood bags spiked in rapid succession. Emily scrubbed with brutal speed, water splashing, breath controlled. Hale hovered at the edge, arms crossed, waiting for failure like a man waiting for weather. "Scalpel," Emily said. The nurse hesitated, eyes flicking to Hale. The colonel's voice boomed over the intercom from the gallery above. "Give her the knife." The incision was not delicate. It was decisive. Blood welled instantly, heat and life spilling into her hands. Emily worked with a rhythm that didn't belong to hospitals. It belonged to places without walls. She spread the ribs, pushed aside the lung, and there it was. Scar tissue. Old damage. The bulge. Angry and pulsing. "I need clamps," she said. "Now." Even Hale leaned forward then, recognition dawning too late as the truth opened in front of them. The first clamp went on above the injury with a heavy metallic click, the sound sharp enough to make the anesthesiologist flinch. The monitor spiked, numbers jumping like startled prey. "Pressure's through the roof," someone yelled. Emily didn't look up. "He'll tolerate it," she said, jaw set. Second clamp. Distal. She reached deeper, fingers sliding past the beating heart, past scar tissue that felt like old gravel. The tissue fought her. Then it failed. The rupture wasn't subtle. It was violent. A wet pop, followed by a red explosion that slammed into her chest and mask. Blood flooded the field, overwhelming suction in seconds. The monitor screamed. "Flatline." "We lost him," the anesthesiologist shouted. "Do," Emily roared, louder than the alarms. "You didn't!" She tossed the instruments aside and plunged both hands into the cavity, gripping the torn vessel with raw force. Her forearms locked, muscles burning as she crushed the bleeding closed against her palms. "More blood," she commanded. "Don't stop. Keep pushing." Hale stepped forward, shaken. "Call it," he said, voice thin. "The aorta's destroyed." Emily lifted her head, eyes blazing through blood-smeared plastic. "I didn't drag him through fire to watch him die under lights," she said. "Get scrubbed?" She didn't ask. She named him. "You're sewing." The room froze. Hale hesitated, pride and terror warring. Then the surgeon in him won. He scrubbed in fast, hands steadying as purpose returned. He took his place opposite her, staring into the ruin she held together with will and grip. "Show me," he said quietly. Emily shifted her hands millimeter by millimeter, creating space without surrender. The monitor flickered back to life, a weak rhythm clawing its way up from nothing. Together, they worked in brutal silence, stitch by stitch, the room holding its breath as dawn began to creep toward the windows. 3 hours later, the sun was just beginning to thin the darkness beyond the frosted glass, turning night into something survivable. The monitors had settled into a steady rhythm, no longer screaming for attention. The blood on the floor had dried into dark, uneven maps. Emily's arms finally trembled as the last suture was tied and cut. Hale stepped back first, shoulders slumping as if gravity had found him again. He peeled off his gloves slowly, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. For the first time since she'd met him, he didn't speak. There was nothing left to defend. They transferred Caldwell to the surgical intensive care unit in silence. No victory laps, no words, just the quiet choreography of people who knew how close they had come to failure. Emily followed the gurney until the doors closed, then slid down the wall outside the unit and sat on the floor, back against the cool paint. Someone handed her a cup of coffee. It was lukewarm and terrible. She held it anyway, both hands wrapped tight, grounding herself in the weight. Her fingers still felt like they were clamped around an artery that wasn't there anymore. It took minutes before the shaking stopped. Boots approached. She looked up to see the colonel lowering himself beside her, ignoring the stares. "They extubated him," he said softly. "He's awake. Angry about the catheter. That's a good sign." Emily nodded once. Relief moved through her, slowly, carefully, like a structure settling after an earthquake. Down the hall, elevator doors opened. The hospital director hurried toward them, face pale with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Before he could speak, the colonel stood. "She saved him," he said simply. "Twice." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise fade. For the first time since she'd walked into St. Gabriel, the building felt quiet, not empty, respectful. 72 hours later, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind paperwork sharp enough to draw blood. The emergency review was scheduled without ceremony, tucked into a calendar slot like a routine meeting, though nothing about it felt routine. Emily stood alone at the end of the long boardroom table, the city spread out behind her through floor-to-ceiling glass, traffic crawling like veins beneath the skyline. She wore a plain grey suit, the kind that didn't ask for attention. Her hands were clasped behind her back, posture straight, eyes forward. Across from her, Victor Hale looked restored, rested, rehearsed. He'd spent the last 2 days reminding the board who he was, who he knew, and how fragile reputations could be when donors got nervous. "We are not disputing the outcome," Hale said smoothly, pacing just enough to project confidence. "We are disputing the process. Dr. Rhodes violated protocol. She assaulted a superior. She commandeered an operating room and performed a high-risk thoracotomy based on speculation." He paused, letting the words sink in. If that patient had died, this hospital would be facing federal scrutiny. Several board members nodded, hands folded, eyes cautious. Money listened more carefully than gratitude. Emily didn't interrupt. She didn't shift. She watched Hale the way she watched unstable patients, noting the tells. The rushed breath, the need to control the room. When asked to respond, she met the chairman's gaze without flinching. "I did my job," she said quietly. "If that's a problem, then I don't belong here." Hale smiled then, small and satisfied, already reaching for the paperwork. The decision felt inevitable. Until the double doors at the back of the room opened, and the sound of wheels on polished wood cut clean through the silence. The room turned as one as the wheelchair rolled forward, pushed by a man in uniform whose presence bent the air. General Jonathan Caldwell looked thinner than the photographs, hospital pale, eye lines trailing from his arm, but his eyes were sharp enough to stop conversations mid-thought. The chairman half rose from his seat, startled. "General, you shouldn't be." "Sit down," Caldwell said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Chairs scraped as the board obeyed. He stopped directly across from Emily, studied her for a long beat, then shifted his gaze to Hale. "I hear you're deciding her future," he said, voice rough from intubation, steady with something older than pain. Hale recovered quickly. "General, with respect, this is an internal personnel matter. We're discussing protocol and patient safety." Caldwell smiled without warmth. "Safety," he repeated. He leaned forward slightly, hands gripping the armrests. 4 years ago, my convoy was hit overseas. I had shrapnel in my chest and no medic left alive. This woman climbed out of a helicopter under fire, dragged me into a ditch, and kept my heart beating with tools that weren't meant for surgery. The room had gone completely still. She told me then that one day that shrapnel might kill me. She was right, and she was there again when it tried. Hale opened his mouth. Caldwell cut him off with a glance. "I was awake on that table. I heard you tell her it was impossible. If she had listened, I'd be buried with honors by now." He turned back to the board. "If you fire her, this hospital will never see another military contract. If you value procedure over lives, you can do it without federal support." Then his eyes returned to Emily. "She's not a liability," he said. "She's an asset. And she's wasted answering to men who freeze when it matters." The threat didn't need repetition. It sat heavy in the room, pressing against polished wood and tailored suits, against men who measured risk in numbers and reputation. The chairman swallowed, fingers tightening on the edge of the table. Someone cleared their throat. No one met Hale's eyes. "This is highly irregular," Hale said, standing too fast, the scrape of his chair loud in the silence. "You can't appoint leadership by intimidation. I have tenure. I have contracts." Caldwell didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You have 5 minutes," he said, turning his gaze back to the board. "Decide who you are." The vote never formally happened. It dissolved under the weight of inevitability. Papers were slid back into folders. Pens were set down. The chairman stood, hands trembling just enough to be human. "Dr. Hale," he said carefully, "we're accepting your resignation effective immediately." Hale laughed once, sharp and hollow. "This is a mistake," he said, already gathering his briefcase. No one stopped him. No one followed. He walked out alone, the door closing behind him with a sound that felt final. The chairman turned to Emily, uncertainty flickering. "Dr. Rhodes," he began. Caldwell answered for him. "Chief of Trauma Surgery," he said. "Effective now." Emily felt it then. Not triumph, not vindication. Responsibility settling onto her shoulders, heavy and familiar. She nodded once. "All right," she said. By afternoon, Hale's name was gone from the door. Emily didn't take his office. She converted it into a family room, couches and warm light, space to breathe. She took a smaller room near the nurse's station, door open, footsteps constant. The building felt different, quieter, not afraid. Emily stood at the central desk, reviewing charts, the city moving beyond the glass. Somewhere, a trauma alarm sounded. She looked up, eyes clear, voice steady. Let's get to work. 3 weeks later, the trauma floor moved with a different sound. Not quieter, sharper, purposeful. The kind of efficiency that came from people who trusted each other, not to freeze when things went wrong. Emily stood at the central station, white coat open, sleeves pushed up, scanning charts while listening to 3 conversations at once. She corrected a medication dose without looking up. She caught a lab delay before it became a problem. Nothing flashy. Just constant presence. Sarah, the nurse who had once laughed in the break room, approached with a tray of coffees balanced like an offering. She stopped a few feet away, uncertain. "Dr. Rhodes," she said, voice tight. We brought you coffee." Black. 2 sugars. She swallowed. If that's still right. Emily looked up, held her gaze, saw the nerves, the recalibration, the unspoken apology. She took the cup, felt the warmth seep into her palms. "That's right," she said. Then after a beat, "Good catch on the DKA patient in Bay 4 this morning. You smelled the ketones before the labs flagged it." That mattered. Sarah's face flushed, pride breaking through fear. "Thank you, Ma'am." "Back to work," Emily said gently. The nurses dispersed with a new energy, shoulders straighter. Down the hall, residents watched her, learning what confidence looked like without volume. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform. She showed up. A shadow fell across the desk. Emily looked up to see Caldwell standing there, cane in hand, civilian suit rumpled, but eyes alive. "Checking on your people?" she asked. "Just one," he said. "They're lucky." Emily glanced around the floor. "So am I." Caldwell smiled, then turned to leave. At the doors he paused, straightened, and raised a slow, deliberate salute toward her. The room stilled. Emily returned it, instinctive, precise. When the doors closed behind him, the floor breathed again. Emily set the coffee down, tied her hair back, and faced the incoming call. The work was waiting. The new rhythm didn't come with speeches or banners. It arrived in small corrections that compounded into change. Emily walked the floor every morning, not to be seen, but to see. She stopped at bedsides, asked nurses what they thought before stating her own plan, waited half a second longer than most people were comfortable with. In that pause, truth surfaced. Mistakes were caught early. Voices that had learned to stay quiet began to speak. Residents learned fast. Not because she intimidated them, but because she demanded thinking. When someone answered by reciting protocol, she tilted her head and asked why. When they guessed, she stopped them cold. "Don't guess," she said evenly. "If you don't know, say you don't know." Then we find out. They left rounds exhausted and sharper, carrying lessons they would never forget. The hospital board noticed the numbers first. Fewer complications, shorter stays, fewer complaints. Donors smiled again. They spoke about leadership and culture in careful language, as if afraid to admit how close they had come to choosing wrong. Emily didn't attend those meetings. She stayed where blood met tile and decisions mattered. One afternoon, she stood alone in the old family room, the one that used to be an office. A man waited there, hands clasped, eyes red. His wife in surgery down the hall. Emily sat with him without checking her watch. She explained what they were doing, what could go wrong, and what they were ready for. He nodded, breathing slower. When she stood to leave, he said thank you, like it cost him something. Back at the desk, an intern hesitated, then asked a question he'd been afraid to ask before. Emily listened, answered, trusted him with the next step. The floor hummed. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, something solid had taken root. The next trauma rolled in just before shift change, sirens bleeding through the sliding doors as the city exhaled another problem it couldn't solve on its own. Emily stepped forward without hesitation, voice calm, hands already moving, the floor aligning around her like a compass finding north. No one waited for permission. They trusted the system she had built, the silence she allowed, the certainty she carried without announcing it. Later, when the alarms quieted and the patient was stable, Emily stood alone for a moment at the glass, watching dusk settle over the skyline. She wasn't thinking about Victor Hale, or the boardroom, or the title stitched onto her coat. She was thinking about the next call, the next life balanced between timing and courage. The work never ended. That was the point. Saint Gabriel had tried to measure her once, by volume, by pedigree, by how much space she took up in a room. It learned the hard way that the most dangerous people are rarely loud. They are precise. They wait. And when the moment comes, they act without apology. Emily turned back to the floor as a nurse called her name, already halfway into motion, already choosing responsibility over recognition. She did not need to be feared. She needed to be followed. And they followed her because she never asked them to do anything she wouldn't do herself. This was not a story about revenge. It was about competence outlasting arrogance, about calm surviving noise, about what happens when real skill finally stands up and refuses to move. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment 3 words below. Quiet, strong, deadly.